In a move that has sent ripples through the nation's political landscape, former President Donald Trump has signed an executive order on election integrity that many experts describe as one of the most far-reaching actions in the history of the Republic. This report examines the content and implications of the order with the thoroughness and analytical rigor expected of an in-depth investigative narrative. At the heart of this development lies a directive intended to secure the nation's electoral process. Trump's executive order is not merely a symbolic gesture. It is positioned as a decisive intervention aimed at safeguarding what is heralded as the very essence of democratic participation. Proponents of the measure tout it as a groundbreaking step toward ensuring secure and orderly elections, while critics warn that it carries dangerous overtones of executive overreach. The language and structure of the order have raised immediate concerns among legal scholars and political commentators alike, who note that its provisions represent a significant departure from established norms regarding presidential authority. A closer examination of the order reveals that it is built on two foundational pillars. The first aspect is the proposed reformation of the voting process itself. Trump's order explicitly suggests a dramatic rollback of several voting options that have become central to modern electoral practices. Among the most contentious proposals is the restriction of voting to a single day, thereby eliminating early voting and mail-in voting opportunities. By narrowing the window of participation to a single day and confining voters to in-person participation only on election day, the order purports to streamline the process. However, it also poses the risk of disenfranchising segments of the electorate who rely on more flexible voting options. Such measures could have the unintended consequence of diminishing overall voter turnout and undermining the fundamental principles of free and fair elections. The second pillar of the executive order addresses the issue of voter eligibility and the mechanisms by which individuals are deemed qualified to cast their ballots. In the language of the order, there is a pronounced emphasis on establishing strict criteria that, on the surface, aim to prevent voter fraud. However, this emphasis on procedural rigor is interwoven with measures that effectively transfer the power to determine voter eligibility from objective standards to the discretion of political actors. For instance, the call for additional proof of citizenship, while ostensibly a safeguard, could serve as a pretext for subjective voter challenges. This would enable those in positions of authority, or those aligned with certain political interests, to arbitrarily determine who qualifies as a citizen eligible to vote. Such a shift could fundamentally alter the electoral landscape, turning what is traditionally a state-regulated process into a battleground for partisan influence. These developments raise the strategic question of what Trump intends to achieve through this series of executive actions. Observers have noted that the executive order is not an isolated incident, but rather part of a broader step-by-step strategy. By steadily eroding the existing frameworks that have long underpinned free and accessible elections, the former president appears to be laying the groundwork for a future in which the determination of voter eligibility, and ultimately which votes are counted, rests in the hands of a select few. This incremental approach, if left unchecked, could lead to a transformation of the electoral process in ways that undermine its democratic legitimacy. Trump's critics contend that this strategy represents not merely a temporary measure, but a calculated effort to reshape the rules of the political arena to his advantage. Integral to this debate is the issue of constitutional authority. Historically, the administration of elections has been regarded as the exclusive domain of state governments. The US Constitution does not vest the federal executive with the power to unilaterally determine the rules governing state-run elections. This long-standing principle forms one of the cornerstones of American federalism. Despite this clear delineation of responsibilities, the executive order in question appears to challenge the status quo by attempting to impose federal standards on what has traditionally been a state-managed process. Such an action is likely to trigger a robust legal response, with potential litigation emerging from both state and private entities. The likelihood of judicial intervention is high, as legal experts argue that any federal overreach in this area is both unprecedented and constitutionally suspect. Furthermore, the implications of this order extend beyond legal boundaries into the realm of political strategy. By attempting to redefine how votes are cast, counted, and ultimately certified, the order signals a profound shift in the power dynamics that govern American democracy. In an era when partisan divisions are already deeply entrenched, this move may serve to further polarize the electorate. Critics argue that the executive order is a direct assault on the principles of inclusivity and equal representation. They contend that by narrowing the avenues for voting, and by empowering partisan gatekeepers to decide who qualifies to vote, the order risks creating an electoral system in which the outcome is predetermined by political favoritism rather than by the free expression of the popular will. Amid these concerns, there is a growing chorus of voices calling for immediate and decisive action. Organizations, legal experts, and state officials alike have emphasized the need to resist any attempt to expand executive power at the expense of the democratic process. The first line of defense, they argue, is a clear and unequivocal rejection of the notion that the presidency carries with it the unfettered authority to dictate electoral rules. It is imperative that public discourse reflects an understanding that the conduct of elections is inherently a state function, safeguarded by both constitutional tradition and judicial precedent. In parallel, there is an urgent call for strategic litigation. Multiple stakeholders have indicated that any attempt to implement these changes should be met with prompt legal challenges. Whether through private lawsuits, state-led litigation, or interventions by non-governmental organizations, the objective is to ensure that any executive overreach is promptly checked by the rule of law. Historical precedents suggest that the judiciary will play a critical role in maintaining the balance of power, and legal experts have stressed the importance of mobilizing all available avenues of judicial review. The need for robust legal defenses is underscored by the potential for federal funding to be wielded as a tool of coercion against states that resist these changes, as seen in recent actions involving states like Maine. In light of these developments, state officials are also being called upon to take a stand. The preservation of electoral integrity is not a negotiable issue. State governments, which have long been the custodians of their own electoral processes, must resist any federal encroachment on their authority. There is a growing consensus that any compromise in the administration of elections, whether through the imposition of new federal standards or the erosion of established voting practices, threatens the very foundation of democracy. State officials are urged to articulate a clear boundary. While cooperation with federal agencies is necessary in many areas, the core responsibilities associated with conducting elections must remain firmly within the jurisdiction of the states. As the debate over this executive order intensifies, the broader implications for American democracy cannot be overstated. The order represents not only a potential restructuring of how elections are conducted, but also a profound test of the nation's commitment to upholding democratic principles. If the current trajectory is allowed to continue unchecked, there is a real risk that the fundamental freedoms that underpin the electoral process could be compromised. It is a moment that calls for both vigilance and decisive action. A moment in which citizens, legal institutions, and state governments must work in concert to defend the integrity of the democratic process. In conclusion, the executive order signed by Donald Trump marks a critical juncture in the ongoing debate over electoral integrity and the proper limits of presidential authority. And the order's provisions, which seek to curtail voting methods and impose subjective criteria on voter eligibility, pose significant challenges to the established norms of American democracy. At its core, this initiative is part of a broader strategy to incrementally redefine the rules of electoral participation. A strategy that, if successful, could have far-reaching consequences for the democratic process. To counter this potential threat, a multifaceted approach is required. Citizens, media professionals, and legal experts must collectively reject the erroneous notion that the presidency confers unlimited power over the electoral process. Legal challenges must be mounted immediately, drawing on the constitutional principle that elections are a state function, not a federal mandate. Furthermore, state officials must assert their authority in defending the integrity of their electoral systems against any undue federal influence. This is a defining moment for American democracy, a moment that demands unwavering commitment to the principles of fairness, transparency, and the rule of law. In defending our electoral system, we are not merely protecting a set of procedures, we are upholding the very essence of democratic governance. The stakes are high, and the time for decisive action is now. For the sake of preserving the integrity of our elections and ensuring that every vote counts in a system free from partisan manipulation, it is imperative that we stand united in defense of our democratic institutions. The road ahead may be fraught with legal battles and political contention, but the resilience of our democracy depends on our ability to safeguard the rights of every citizen. As the controversy over this executive order unfolds, it is clear that the fight for fair and free elections has entered a critical phase. The call to action is clear: defend the process, uphold the Constitution, and ensure that the power to determine the outcome of an election remains in the hands of the people, not a select few. This investigative report serves as both a warning and a call for proactive engagement. The transformation of our electoral system is not a matter to be taken lightly. It requires the vigilance of every citizen, the expertise of legal scholars, and the commitment of state officials to maintain the balance of power as enshrined in our Constitution. In these turbulent times, the defense of democracy remains our paramount responsibility. We must act decisively, ensuring that our electoral process continues to reflect the will of the people and the enduring values of transparency and fairness.